Welcome, golf fans, pursuers of knowledge and the almighty dollar. This is your golf guru, and I am bringing you today a series of learning videos. I've had some requests from my subscribers that they'd like to understand some different topics. A big one is understanding stroke gain analysis, and the short of it is, some folks have asked me, it sounds like you're speaking a different language. And I also remember years back when I first started trying to understand and listen to different shows when they would talk in acronyms or stroke gain analysis or things like that, I was also felt like I was a little behind the curve. So this is going to be hopefully about 20, 30 minutes, a deep dive in why stroke gain analysis is important to understand, how you can use it to pick winners, help you with straight out betting, creating your lineups, but also so you can understand when I'm doing kind of my deep dive into why I'm picking the players I am. And I do provide the kind of how the sausage is made, or, what's under the hood. I think it's important to understand how I've got to my conclusions. So we are going to dive into this. Okay. So a little bit of background on stroke gain analysis, or stroke gain. Where did this come from and what is it all about? So in short, probably over about, I think it was 2007, this gentleman up here in the top right, this Mark Brody, who's also involved with, I think, the USGA or something like that, but also is a professor, thought, hey, there's a lot better way that we can do analysis on how players are actually performing. And if you just take a step back at the highest level, stroke gain data, what it is looking at a single player's performance for any given hole, round, or 72 round versus the rest of the field. And so in the past, it used to be they would just kind of look at, fairways gained, greens in regulation, how many putts did they have for the round. And that's not kind of very, I'd say, high level. We'll call it macro look at their performance. And what this is a micro look at their performance. And again, it's looking at individual players at a given tournament versus the field. And what that does is it does a lot of things, but one is allowing to interact. When you're like, if you look at PGA Tourcast, you can literally watch shot by shot and see how your golfers are doing. It's a way to give predictions of, during, coverage that the announcers for the tournaments to say, oh, he's got a 50% chance of making this putt, or a 22% because it's outside of, these feet. And this is how many people's made a putt within 9 feet and stuff like that. How it works is that there's the PGA Shot Link. These guys travel from tournament to tournament. It's about 300 people involved who typically have already mapped out the course. So did like a 3D mapping of the whole course. And then you'll see those towers all around the course, and cameras, these special kind of cameras. If you think of TrackMan, there's all this kind of technology that's on the course for each of these rounds. And that is what is literally tracking each shot from each player. And so this screen that you're seeing, it's just showing John Rahm. They show, this is actually Tourcast, shows a video of him actually in real time, showing all kinds of things like ball speed, the apex of the ball, the flight, how much curvature. So that's, did the ball move, how much right or left, where it exactly landed on the green, kind of all that kind of information. So at a high level, that's just kind of a quick understanding. And the best way to kind of figure, I always think, if you look at shot gain, and I'll say shot gain, I say that all the time. It's really stroke gain, but you'll hear me say shot gain. You'll hear people, bring those in and out, but it's really stroke gain. The simplest way to think about it is, in the past, if they said he had 2 putts on this green, but if you understood that actually it was a 3-foot putt and he missed a 3-foot putt, comparative to he missed a 40-foot putt and had to tap it in, right? So that's the kind of analysis to really understand how well they're putting. Because a stroke, no matter if it's a 350-yard drive or it's a 1-inch putt, it's all the same. It's a stroke. But to be able to do analysis and really understand how a player is performing, you need to dive into the micro side. And that's what we're kind of talking about. So the first thing to kind of understand is stroke gain data categories. And so you know, as I mentioned earlier in the past, it was what you'd see FIR, fairways in regulation, or GIR, greens in regulation. And now what we're looking at is more of these four kind of categories. And there's a couple others, but these are the main four. And the best way to understand it. So the putting is pretty simple, right? As I kind of mentioned, it's measuring the number of putts, but it's also taking all the distances, and it's looking at, so if you see someone as draining, you know, like Mackenzie Hughes for a day drains 7 putts from outside of 40 feet, his stroke gain putting is going to go way up against the field. Like if you look at the next one would be off the tee. You know, this is anything that is literally hit off the tee on par fours and par fives. So that does not take in par threes, which is key because, you know, typically they are on par threes not hitting anything but an iron. And we'll talk a little more about that. But off the tee, so if you think of like a Bryson DeChambeau, why he gains, when you hear someone say, oh, Bryson leads the field off the tee, it means that he's hitting almost 400-yard drives in the fairway, where maybe someone like a, you know, Ryan Armour, you know, hits in the fairway, but he's only hitting it 280. And the difference is that if you, of course, are closer to the green, you can hit a lot less iron into the green, and which typically says you're going to put the ball in proximity to the hole a lot closer. So that's why this kind of information is important. You also hear strokes gain approach to the green. And I also put, these are the acronyms you'll typically see. So off the tee is OTT, approach to the green is APP. Not sure, I guess just for the approach. And then around the green, ARG. So approach to the green is taking everything in. So after you've hit the tee shot, every shot that it is then coming into the green is an approach to the green. This takes into effect also par threes, because typically, as I mentioned, you're hitting irons and there's shots that are less than 200 yards. So why that's important again is if we know we have a course that, you know, ball strikers, you'll hear that terminology. Ball striking also is a combination of off the tee and approach. So if you hear like Sergio Garcia is a great ball striker, that just means that he's hitting off the tee, nice distance in the fairway, but also when he has his approach, he's also hitting, you know, a lot more greens in regulation. So it's kind of that combination when you hear ball striking. And then, of course, around the green is pretty much simple. So anything within 30 yards, they will take into consider, you know, around the green. It's a around the green shot. So if you're outside of 30 yards, it's going to still be considered an approach shot. And then if you hear total strokes gained, that's just adding up off the tee, approach to the green, around the green, and putting, the 4 key categories that we're talking about. And this kind of, I thought, was a pretty good illustration. It doesn't have it around the green, but it just kind of show you, again, anything off the tee, and then, of course, anything to the fairway, and then, of course, the putt. Okay, so what you're asking is, why am I listening to this, and why is this useful to me? So when you start to kind of do analysis and start to think about when you are constructing lineups, or even outright betting, or, you know, top 20 bets, whatever it is, when you can understand the course that they're going to play and understand how the player fits that course, which you'll hear the terminology horses for courses, then you get a good understanding of, you know, if I can look at this player's shot gain totals, again, I said it again, stroke gain totals, but shot gain totals, then I can really understand, do I want to pick this player over another player? And so I just picked some random players, but let's talk about Bryson, because I think it's a good example, especially for off the tee. And let's talk about the tournaments that he won recently. So off the tee, he's leading the field, of course, because of his distance and accuracy, the combination. He's number 1. And if you look at these bars right here, the PGA Tour average for each player is at 100. And what I mean by that is, if you are below 100, you're below average against the PGA, all the PGA players. And if you're above 100, then you're actually above. So what you can see here real quick, and this is looking at all his statistics for the 2019-2020 season. And of course, as I mentioned, he leads off the tee. His approach to the green is where, you know, he's below average, and around the green, he's below average. But putting, which is kind of funny, and I mentioned this before, a lot of people think or have said, you know, that Bryson's not that great of a putter. And when he first came on tour, he did struggle a little bit with putting, but he's come a long way, and now he's 10th. And this is, again, out of every PGA player there is. And so if you look at tournaments like Winged Foot, where he won the US Open, not a lot of hazards and trouble. And even though the rough was long, because of his power and how much distance he gained on the field, even Matthew Wolff, who I believe ended up second now, I kind of forget, but he was right there. Of course, they were in the hunt last day. Because they drove the ball so far that even when they got in the rough, they could still hit a higher iron. So hitting an 8-iron out of the rough comparative to try to hit a 5-iron out of the rough is night and day. And that's why those guys scored better, and that's why ultimately Bryson won the tournament. I mean, of course, he had to make some putts, but ultimately that course set up for guys that could hit the ball further and they could hit less clubs out of the rough. That's the simplest way to put it. Now, if you look at the Masters, where everybody was predicting and, you know, from a betting odds and everything, that he was just going to outright smoke the course. And the conditions, funny enough, were about as easy as you're ever going to get at Augusta. But he struggled. And that's why I was fading him, because the one thing that I know that you must do very well at Augusta is, yes, it helps to have length off the tee. It is a very long course, 7,400 yards. But the key things also is you have to have a great approach shot, and you have to be really, really good around the greens there. Because in typical Augusta fashion, even when you hit greens, unless you hit them in the perfect spot, the greens are typically very firm and they don't hold. They'll move your ball off the green. It's just the way the course is built. And so it doesn't shock me, again, why Bryson struggled there. Now, you know, he maybe wasn't hitting the driver as good as he wanted. He had a couple bad breaks. But ultimately, I didn't think it was that great of a course fit comparative to what everybody else thought. And, of course, the other ideas were that he could take lines because of how high and how far he hits it. He could cut out a lot of the trees and take lines to remove issues. But I also said, if you're just a little off when you're hitting that far, of course, you're going to be in trouble. Okay. So somebody else to think about. So Corey Connors. Okay. If we look at Corey, and I picked this because I thought it was actually kind of interesting, where Corey is I think one of the most accurate and good distance off the tee. So again, he's ranked number 13th. So just 12 players below Bryson, but he's amazing on approach too. So these two categories are, you know, amazing. But where he really struggles is the putter. And he won the Valero Open. And really that course, you know, it does demand some accuracy. But the good news is when you have a player like this, if the putter clicks and they just get confidence and they just start making things, that's when they can go out and win a tournament. But good course fit for Corey, if you start to think about this, would be RBC Heritage. So when I always think of one of the tighter courses, one of the tougher courses on the PGA schedule, because it's very tight. And if you get into the trees or, you know, the rough or whatever, you're going to have issues. And so you need guys who, like CT Pan, who won it the previous year. He's just a very accurate driver. And so where you start to leverage this is when you start to understand, and how I use it is understand the course they're going to, and then be able to do the analysis of these players using stroke gain. That's how you can start to match up players. And again, if some people already know this, of course, then, you know, of course, hopefully you've already tuned out. But for people that don't understand how you leverage stroke gain and also the course, then this, I think, is very valuable for you. And then the last one I'll just do is Harris English. And I picked him because he's above average in all the shot gain, again, stroke gain categories. You know, he's not the greatest off the tee, but he's still above average by 50 players, or by 50 points, if you want to look at it that way. Great with the approach, great around the green, and a great putter. So if you think about the recent tournament that they just played at, sorry, I just had a blank, at the RSM, and of course, he's from that area. So, you know, there's those kind of things that go in, but it was a good fit because, again, you didn't have to be long at that course. You just had to do everything really well. And that's rare. There's only a handful, well, maybe 10 players. If you start to look at all their stroke gain categories that fit that bill, like a Justin Thomas or a Rahm or Rory, which, you know, he's faltered a little bit. And typically on tour, or of course, Dustin Johnson is a great example, where they thrive in all four. And if you thrive in all four categories, you are going to win or be very relevant in every tournament. And that's why understanding stroke gain is so important. And of course, again, as I mentioned, also matching up, you know, the courses to fit where they perform. Like, even I think I was going to put Cameron Champ in here. He does one thing very well, and that is off the tee. I think he's actually ranked number 2 behind Bryson. He's very accurate, hits a low ball flight, and hits it really long. He doesn't even, he could get more distance. It probably could be longer than Bryson, just with natural ability that he has. But he doesn't try to go out and hit it high because he, you know, starts to lose control of it. And where I'm going with that is, if you start to break down the PGA player field, all the PGA players, the typical guy that's not fitting the top 10 class will do one of these things very well. Like maybe Kevin Na doesn't hit the ball very far, but he putts lights out. Or like Brian Gay, who just won the Bermuda. The only thing he really does really well is putt. And he really putts well on Bermuda. So the more you can start to understand the micro of this, the more that you can start picking. And even with all this, of course, my picks, you know, I think I probably hit somewhere between 60 and 70%, because there's, of course, they're humans and anything can happen. And also the putting is what it all comes down to. All right, I digress. I'm getting a little off track. All right, here's another way that you can use stroke gain data. And this is, I believe, the Houston Open. Yeah, Carlos Ortiz won. And so if you're doing like Showdown, I highly recommend that, you know, you sit here and do analysis round by round. So depending if it's, you know, if you're doing Showdown for the first round, you're really kind of going off just recent form, some course fit, you know, how you're feeling about the player. But if you use this, say, for Friday's round, Saturday's round, Sunday's round, you get more and more information about how they're doing on that course. And I'm not so much concerned about, you know, how many birdies. You know, I do kind of look at the bogeys. But what I really look at is how are they doing off the tee, approach, and putting. All these come in and tell a picture, and I'll explain this. All right, so let's look at Sam Burns at, and this again was at the Houston. He was almost leading the field off the tee, almost leading the field on approach. But if you look at his putting, and Sam Burns is not the greatest putter, but you can kind of look at his benchmark and understand, okay, Sam Burns doesn't typically putt this bad. And so I like Sam Burns because if he has a round where he just gets the putter back to even or a little above, he's going to make a ton of birdies that day. And he's, you know, and he's a good Showdown play. And you can also see, this is after the final results, that he led the field tee to green, even losing strokes putting. Now, if you look at Carlos Ortiz, you know, you can see, yes, total shot gain or stroke gain is over 15. He led the field in that, but, you know, he didn't lead off the tee. He didn't lead on approach. He really gained on putting. And when I see a player that's, you know, gaining almost 6-7 strokes putting, and Ortiz is not that good of a putter. He's not bad, but he's not that good of a putter. I also know that the next tournament, the odds that he's going to reduplicate that is pretty slim. Trying to think. Oh, and then around the green. So around the green is a stat that I think can be kind of tricky. And what I mean by that is, if you see someone that has a really high around the green, so this is someone that's within 30 yards and they're chipping it and getting up and down. And what that means is they're getting it within, you know, a foot, or they're chipping the golf ball in the hole. So if you see someone that has a really high around a green, that means that they're typically, not always, but typically they're missing on their approaches and they're having some chip ins. Or if you think of Jordan Spieth, a perfect example of someone that typically is going to have a really high around the green. He's typically, you know, off the tee all over the place. His approach when he gets it within like 120 is pretty solid, but even his approach is not great. But his short game is amazing. And if the putter is on, that's where Jordan makes his birdies. So just an example. And then here's just one more. This was actually the RSM. I pulled this one up too, so just recent ones. So I thought it was kind of interesting. This is a rarity where Robert Streb, who won in a 2-hole playoff against Kisner, actually led in none of these shot gain categories, and that's rare. Typically, they'll lead in at least one, if not a couple, but typically they'll lead in the total shot gain. And so if you looked at Kisner, just barely fell behind Rory in total shot gain categories. I'm going to say that a billion times. Stroke gain, shot gain, same thing to me. But I just pulled this up because, again, you could just do some quick analysis. Like Kyle Stanley struggled off the tee, but led in approach. The putter ultimately is what, Kyle Stanley kind of killed him in this tournament. Because like I said, those greens were not tough to putt on. I don't think, comparative to what I've seen. But you can see where Patton Kizzire, which can kind of make you, a little wheezy in the next tournament he goes to, where you're like, okay, not great off the tee, really not good on approach. Did okay around the green. So, his short game is what saved him. But when you see, and Patton Kizzire is a good putter, but again, if you look at his average, he doesn't gain over 8 strokes putting. And tee to green lost over 3 strokes. So the putter just saved him. So it kind of tells a picture, it kind of tells you a story, and allows you to really understand, if you start to look at this information over the past, 4 or 5 tournaments, really, how are they playing? Are they, just surviving on getting real lucky with the putter? Or even a different way to look at it is, if they're kicking butt tee to green, but they are below average on putting, they're just in a putting slump, this is a guy you want to watch coming forward. So that's probably the simplest way to look at it. And then kind of taking it, now this is the next step, and this is the stuff that I do and I share with you guys, is now taking shot gain analysis and even further, and where you can start modeling the information that you want to model. And so this is just an example. This is from the RSM, and I just pulled it up. But now you can start to understand how you apply this. So this takes the whole player field for the RSM, and they can do this round by round, but this is to start the actual tournament. Of course, it shows you salary, and you can pick how many rounds, which is kind of funny because I actually picked 24, but for some reason it's saying 50, but neither here, it doesn't matter. But you want to make sure that's correct when you're doing your analysis. When you put in 24 and run your, this is a custom stat model. What that means is that I had the ability to go pick all the different shot gain categories that I think is important for the course that they're coming to play. And so that's when you see me go through the kind of first look or the preview show, I kind of start the very beginning analysis of understanding the course, understanding what it takes to be successful there. And that's, I can do that through course breakdown, past course conditions. There's a lot of things that I get that. But then what I derive from that is, okay, here's the areas that we need to focus on. And this wasn't what I even used for RSM. I just pulled this up as examples. But as we already learned, off the tee, and then I can weight it. So, 10% I could weight. I could weight it 100% if that's all I cared about. But you need a mix of these things. Of course, approach, we already know around the green, putting. Typically, I put these 2 in. These were a little bit older information, but fairways gained. Because if you mix driving distance with fairways gained, it's a nice combo that says, hey, off the tee is kind of just measuring, it kind of measures that, but it doesn't, I don't think, get into specifics. And I like to see the combination. Here, I would have been more concerned about greens and regulation than I would have been driving distance. But again, it's just some other stats. And then if there's a lot of par 3s at this distance, you put those in, par 4s, par 5s, so they're scoring. A key one on approach is proximity to the hole. So if the distance that they're typically going to be hitting from, if you're figuring, it's shorter par 4s and the guys hit it 300 yards, and it shows when you look at the course breakdown, where what the typical approach shot is, is 3-putt avoidance, opportunities gained or birdie or better. All that is guys that are getting opportunities to make birdies or eagles. And typically is a key stat. If we're looking at this upcoming, like the Mayakoba, we're going to want to know, because they need to, shoot 20 under, who's getting the most birdie or better or opportunities gained. I think they're kind of the same thing. And then other things that I can do is this pulling up all historical data. You can, and there's a ton of different filters down here, but of course you can put the greens, green firmness, what type of grass, to find out who does well on that. Of course, this, what is the par value to par? So par 70, 71, 72. You can find out the designers. You can break it down by, past conditions. Is it windy? How do they play there? There's all these different kind of filters that you can apply to really kind of micro into who's your top pool. And then you can click on my rank and it will give you, of course, the top players. And funny enough, this wasn't what I used, but just curious. So Harris English did pretty well. It's funny enough, you don't see no Strub on here, or is Kisner on here? No. But again, this wasn't the areas that I was looking at. Actually, the model actually did pull up Kisner, but did not pull up Strub. And just because if you look at Strub's, it was, so there's a perfect example. Even with all this kind of information analysis, there's always the guy who goes back to the course that he won at before, like Strub, and just gets those good feelings. And even though recent form isn't that great, he doesn't do anything really great or well. He just, all of a sudden just, starts firing away because he's so comfortable at that course. Good thoughts. So that's it. I didn't really want to get into the model side so much. I really just wanted to give a really good understanding of when you hear the whole stroke gain analysis and information, that you understand what we're talking about. Oh, and there is one last piece. I wanted to show this because this is how I've been kind of showing to you guys lately. And I think it's the best way on who I'm picking and why I'm picking. And this, again, it breaks down. Now, these are just, as we were talking about, the key shot gain categories. And this gives a really nice, clean understanding in one view of everything I think you really want to know when you're making your selections to some degree. So, of course, you have the salary, you have projection ownership. You can quickly understand where they rate in here, and then you can understand the trend that they're on. So, last 24 rounds, you can change that, but that's typically what I look at. I think that's a good sample for recent form. You can see their recent results. Of course, that's key. And then, of course, you can go break into these. So if you're using comparable courses to the course that you're looking at, that they're going into. And then, of course, tournament history is, again, shown. If you look at Brian Gay, who won at Bermuda, hasn't done anything for the past few years. Not the best recent form. But again, he went back to a course that he's won at before, that he's very comfortable with. It fits his eye. It fits his game. And bam, there you go. He wins. Robert Streb, same thing. But anyways, yeah. So this is just a different way. And I think it's the cleanest way when I show you guys why I pick these guys, what I'm finding out. I, of course, do a lot more analysis than that. But from a summary, this is what I like to show it in. And now that you understand off the tee approach, you can even see this and go, oh, okay, that makes sense, because we're not so worried about distance at this one, but we're really worried about approach and putting. Or, you know what? This is TPC Harding, and it is 7,500 yards. And they're going to, you're going to struggle if you can't hit the ball 300 plus and accurate. So first thing we got to worry about is, getting you off the tee. So anyways, I hope that helps. I hope that when I'm having the conversations and explaining who I'm picking and what I'm looking at, that you are also understanding what the heck is this guy talking about. And again, as always, if you are getting value from this, please hit the like button, share it with anybody else that you think would get value. And if you're not subscribing yet, please subscribe. I do put out 3 different shows a week. Typically Monday is my first look or preview show. And then on Tuesday, I share my top plays, mid-range, low range, who am I fading, and then, of course, I do my hidden gems on Wednesday. So thanks so much. Again, I'm going to keep kind of doing some of these education series that will just be on my channel. They'll be there for whoever needs, and especially during the holidays here where we got a little bit of time. Again, have a happy Thanksgiving, and look forward to us talking next week when I release for the Mayakoba my plays. All the best.